Oh no, I think we got it here. That was done on purpose to show that life is what happens when we're busy making plans. Technology. Okay. So, I'm going to be speaking on nutrition, hopefully here. Sometimes we like to go backwards. Dr. Lexi, yeah, if you want to hit.
Yeah, I think it's like a signal thing.
Okay, to prove my point even further, I thought it'd only not work for Dr. Lexi, but that happens. This was from the talk I had given last time, a couple of stats on health. Sometimes we need to hear things a few times, but just to really show where we're at. June of 2016, 38% of Americans are obese, including 17% of teenagers. By 2030, half of adults, 114 million, expected to be obese. And then we also went into some of the older Americans. Over 65, average of 14 prescriptions a year, 7 a day. According to the CDC, 6 in 10 Americans have a chronic disease, 4 in 10 Americans have 2 or more. And the U.S. spends $3.8 trillion on healthcare annually. U.S. government took in $3.5 trillion in taxes in 2019. So a number of stats that are out there. I mean, it doesn't take too much research to understand where we're at in the world. Part of our talk, even today, as far as kids, and Dr. Boach will go into more of some of the mental aspects, even as far as school. So this is right out of the Daily Herald today on Tuesday, March 16th. For all you Finnish folk out there, it's St. Urho's Day, so happy St. Urho's Day. Chased all the grasshoppers out of Finland. We know St. Patrick tomorrow, but St. Urho, yep, okay. So as far as right in the paper today, survey, students struggling online classes blamed. One Wisconsin school district, 2 in 5 high school students failed a class during their first semester. In another, the fall failure rate was 4 times higher than what it had been in recent years. So obviously there's a lot of things going on with kids. Dr. Boach will talk about some of the mental aspects, some of the things that we can do for them. I'm going to focus more on the nutrition. Before I get into it, and my talk's going to be pretty simple tonight, I've been told sometimes my slides get a little bit too complicated, too much stuff on them, so I'm going to keep them very simple tonight. One of the things Dr. Lexi had just mentioned, and even for the kids, just so you guys know, and you can check your kids at home. In fact, when we have them come in fact, if I'm seeing an adult with kids in the room, we'll just show parents how to check, just like Dr. Lexi showed. So when you saw that picture of the one kid with the lower shoulder blade, and they had, if you have an excessive curve in the spine from the side, it's called a scoliosis. It's called an Adams flexion orthopedic test. And what you're checking for when you have a patient bend down and try and touch the toes, you're trying to check for a high shoulder blade. And usually that tells us, boy, we're getting some rotation in the spine. Now, over 80% of scolioses are what are called idiopathic. Does anyone know what that term means? Okay, it's a fancy medical term for we don't know what causes it, scoliosis. In my career, and this is my 12th year in practice, I've only had one scoliosis case, and given, like Dr. Lexi said, yeah, there's a genetic component, a congenital component. I've only had one case where there was a vertebrae formed. It was a half vertebrae or hemivertebrae. Most of the time, when we see a scoliosis, we'll see either a rotated pelvis. So how would we cause that? Let's say I just stood on the same leg every day. Let's say I just crossed the same leg every day. In fact, when I was first seen, I didn't even know it. At 19, I saw my first chiropractor. I always stood on my right leg, and I sat on a wall at back pocket. And guess how my spine looked? Back pocket, just like this. Okay? So that rule of opposites we always teach to kids, but especially, and then besides a rotated pelvis, the other thing that we tend to see is a loss of one of these curves. And Dr. Lexi talked a lot about it. If I start to bring my head forward here, I put a lot of tension back here. Some of you may have heard of Osgood-Schlatters disease, okay, where I have the insertion of this big quad muscle into my tibia. It can start to pull up. Well, the same thing happens back here. So let's take a look at the spine as far as when it's forming. Okay, it's formed in a C-shaped curve, and then we start to lift up the head, and then we start to crawl, and that's what develops these secondary curves. Well, let's say I do a lot of sitting, or I do a lot of repetitive texting. If I don't develop enough of the secondary curves, biomechanically, my body will start to naturally put in a sideways curve. So almost always, if we can catch a scoliosis early enough, we'll teach kids rule of opposites, have the parents watch them, but we'll really start to focus in on enhancing this lower back and neck curve. And part of that starts with not having a pillow that's too thick and not texting all the time. So I know I was going to go right into nutrition, but I thought biomechanics pretty important to start with tonight. Next slide. Okay, perfect. So if you just watch this slide, that's it. That's pretty much my presentation. I have more after this, but keeping it simple, I think sometimes nutrition, if you look at all the stuff out there, do I go vegan? Do I go vegetarian? Do I go keto? Do I go carnivore? There's tons of different things. Well, a human being requires primarily 3 things: essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, vitamins, and minerals. And that's it. So if you keep coming back to this and you make sure kids, even adults, I know tonight's talk is more on kids, but if you can make sure you're getting that every day, you're generally going to be okay. Why we recommend different things like a multivitamin, and I'll talk more about even what I take. Currently, I take a multivitamin called Alpha Base. So my vitamins and minerals, I don't eat 7 to 10 cups of veggies a day like I should. So my multi is my insurance policy. Okay, next slide. So if we're going to add in 3 things, essential fatty acids, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, what are the foods to avoid? Added sugar, trans fats, and excess omega-6s. Okay. Just so you guys know a little bit more, because I'm sure everyone's heard avoid trans fat. All that trans fats are, it's basically where we hydrogenate, so we throw on an extra hydrogen group. So a cis fat, unsaturated, they're all on the same side. A trans fat, they throw an extra hydrogen group on there, and it makes it more stable. So at room temperature, it's going to be more stable on the shelf, and it may last for years. Everyone talks about if we went through World War III, get Twinkies. It'll probably last 100 years. Okay, next slide. These are some of your examples of trans fats. Coincidentally, all these foods taste delicious. Thus the phrase, if it tastes good, don't eat it. Okay, next slide. Kind of a funny slide, and I'll read it here in case you can't see it. How many donuts are in your drink? So this is a 20-ounce bottle of soda. 6 donuts is one. And you talk about the liquid calories. You have in a 16-ounce, you have 5.5 donuts. Even in a 12-ounce juice, so sugar, 3.5 donuts. And of course, there's someone looking on the bright side. Honestly, my takeaway from this chart is that donuts are healthier than I thought. So. Okay. Omega-3s and omega-6 fats, just so you know a little bit, it comes down as far as chemistry. So the third carbon away from what's called the methyl group, a CH3 group, that's where you have an omega-3, and it's the first double bond. An omega-6 would be the 6th carbon, and then an omega-9 would be the 9th one. Omega-3s are generally going to be liquid at room temperature. Okay, next slide. Very simple, eat the rainbow. I think sometimes as far as making nutrition really complex, especially if a person's more on a Mediterranean type diet, try to get in as many colors as you can each day. Okay, next slide. If you want to make it more complex, well, my child is this age and they're male or female, this how many calories. I think if you go back to that initial slide, you can tell if your kid's putting on too much weight or not. I think this is a good guideline to go off of, but you don't have to go that specific. Okay, next slide. This came out in 1992. My personal belief is if we were to flip this upside down, it would probably be healthier for us. If I want to fatten livestock, I feed them grains and corn. Yet they're supposed to be the staple of our diet. So what do they think that they do to humans? Fatten us up. So if it were me, I would take this food pyramid, flip it upside down. That was the past. Now we have something new. If you go forward, we have the healthy eating plate. Same thing, and these are some examples. If it were me, this whole grains portion would be a whole lot smaller. Fruits, vegetables, proteins, even good fats, I would make that a little bit bigger. Okay, next slide. So keeping it simple, we're going to expand on that a little bit. So I have my essential amino acids. I have my essential fatty acids, so EPA and DHA. So if you guys, and I'd gone over this last time, if you look at a quality fish oil, the majority of it should be EPA and DHA. EPA is what's really needed by us adults. It works almost like Advil. It's anti-inflammatory. DHA is what helps develop the brain. That's why we want to have kids to have more of it. Well, let's say I'm vegan and I get most of my omega-3s from ALA, or what's called alpha-linoleic acid. The only problem with that is only 8% is converted to EPA and 0 to 4% into DHA. So the tough thing, especially if a person does rely more on plants than that, you got to eat a whole lot more of them. Okay. Vitamins and minerals, we get those from our fruits, veggies, proteins, fats, carbs, and obviously a multi if I'm not getting all those. Next slide. So a couple things, preconception. So one, as far as a prenatal goes, so prenatals, when you really look at it, they contain a couple of extra things. Folic acid or B9, and I'll go more into that next slide, DHA and iodine. Men need zinc. Zinc is really important as far as sperm health. So we need 10 milligrams a day. That's usually found in a good multi. If I'm fighting off a virus, because it helps keep a virus from replicating, obviously everything going on the past year, I have extra zinc on my shelf. I take 50 milligrams 3 times a week. Preconception, men and women should both be eating healthy, exercising, and minimizing stress. Stress is a huge one. If you think of the human body, if I'm super stressed out, do I have time to grow a little one? That's why sometimes you hear people of adopting, and then all of a sudden they end up pregnant a few months later. Okay. A word on folic acid. So your body needs folate. Folic acid was first synthesized in 1943. Some people can't convert folic acid into folate. And folate is just Latin for folium or leaf. So if you're eating deep leafy greens, you're usually getting plenty of folate. So some of you may have heard of, especially on 23andMe genetic tests, the MTHFR mutation. If you can't convert folic acid into folate, you get into trouble. Why they put it into prenatals, if I don't have enough B9 or folate, it can end up causing neural tube defects, which means in some people, the spine doesn't close here and even around the cord it doesn't. Okay? So if I was getting ready preconception, I would just up my deep leafy greens. Okay? Folic acid was actually added to grains in the late 90s here in the US. Okay, next slide. The other thing that they'll put in there, iodine. One of the top causes of mental retardation in the world is iodine deficiency. Now, we don't usually see goiters in this country anymore because we iodized our salt here right around 100 years ago. You'll usually see this like if you live in Japan, like from sea kelp and that. Our RDA is usually around 100 to 200 micrograms. In Japan, they may eat 10 milligrams a day. So iodine is really important. That's why you'll also see that in a prenatal. Okay, next slide. Couple of things that you can do. We always get asked by parents that come in here with infants, kids, what should I have them on? Kind of going back to that first slide when they're 5 and above, amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals. Infants, ideally, breastfeed till 6 to 12 months. I might add in a probiotic right away, especially if they weren't born naturally. Okay, next. These are a couple of different suggestions as far as fruits, vegetables, grains. Like I said, you can make it really complex if you want. I try to keep things simpler. Okay, next slide. Toddlers, to help the brain out. So my little nephew is a little over 2 now, 2.5. Starting at age 1, I had got him DHA drops to help develop his brain. Okay. Kids 5 and up, one of the most perfect foods ever, cod liver oil. Does anyone remember Grandma giving cod liver? So cod liver oil, it has your anti-infective vitamin, vitamin A, vitamin D, obviously huge, especially in this the past year. And it also has your omega-3, so it's one of the most perfect things. So kids 5 and up. The reason I say 5 and up, sometimes too much vitamin A for kids when they're younger, it's tougher on their livers. But cod liver oil and a quality multi. Okay, I think I have 1 or 2 slides left. Young adults, going back to my very first slide, essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, vitamins and minerals. This is just an example of what I take on a daily basis. So these currently, and we switch between a couple of different, right now I'm using orthomolecular products. I also use standard process. But this is what I take on a daily basis. I take an alpha base, I take a vitamin D3, K2 at least till Memorial Day, and I take an omega-3. If I'm doing 2 of these a day, a couple of these and 1 vitamin D, it probably costs about $2 a day. Sometimes people ask, well, what's it cost to take all those? Okay. Last one. Very important, and this is one on overeating, but I think it's easy to beat ourselves up. I think of, I was treating a patient here a number of years ago, but kids were in the room running around, and I had asked Mom, what the kids had, or what'd you guys have for breakfast? And the one kid goes, ice cream, and I looked over at Mom, and she says, don't judge, it was a terrible morning. So the key is, not to beat yourself up. I mean, we all have a cheat day. We might have a cheat week. We might even have a cheat month. When it turns into a cheat year, a cheat decade, that's when it starts to become a problem. So don't beat yourself up. That's it for my presentation. Thank you.